Everyone's thinking about the Roman Empire today, right? That's the thing that men think about the Roman Empire. Well, I thought about it a lot when I was there because you can't miss it. Everywhere you go, there are signs of the Roman Empire. But what are they? They're ruins. It's a wreck. It's a wreck. There's dusty ruins remain. But there I was as a bishop of the Catholic Church, founded by that baby, right? Founded by that baby who was put to death on a miserable cross by Caesar's representative. And yet Caesar and his empire, they are long gone. But the baby with the angel army won. And that church weirdly endures to this day.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the senior publishing director at Word on Fire. Is the Christmas story little more than a sweet saccharine tale about a cute baby being born? Or do the Gospels present something more subversive and revolutionary, a battle between two great kings? Well, that's how Bishop Robert Barron reads it, and he joins us today from our Word on Fire studio in Rochester. Bishop, good to see you again.
Hey, Brandon. Always good to see you.
Saw you in person about a week or two ago because we had the big Good News Conference held every year. This year it was back in Orlando, Florida, my hometown. I was overjoyed to be able to help as the MC for the conference, but tell us how it went. You got to celebrate Mass, you gave a keynote talk, a book signing, but then I think the big highlight was this panel discussion that you shared with Jordan Peterson and Father Mike Schmidt. So maybe recap all that for us.
Yeah, it was a thrill. I always enjoy the Good News Conference, and they worked me this year, as you're saying. I did a lot, but always a joy to see all the folks there at the book signing. I gave a keynote after dinner, and I forgot what night that was, but that was a great joy. And, I hearing Immaculée Iligabiza for the first time. I'd read her book many years ago. I've read about her and so on. But it was my first chance to meet her, and I, with great interest, sat, through her talk. So that was a privilege. And then, the onstage discussion with Father Mike and with Jordan Peterson was great. And much as you expect, Peterson, it was a kind of a brainy, heady, high wire act, with him. But he was good. He engaged, the two of us, and our own Matt Petrusik was the host for that, the man kind of keeping it together. And it went by pretty fast. I mean, it was hour and 20 minutes, because Jordan, God bless him, came in and he did that event, and then he had to go right back to the airport. And so we cut it off at about an hour and 20 minutes. But hoping that'll come out at some point, huh? We'll have a chance to publish that. But it was it was a joy.
Recorded the video, so I hope we'll be able to release it soon.
Yeah,
I was laughing because I think we had scheduled that panel discussion for an hour, which in retrospect was probably about 1/10 as long as it needed to be. And as the MC, we let it go for like an hour and 20 minutes, and then I came out on stage kind of to try to wrap it up. And as soon as people saw the MC come out, they started booing. Yeah. I thought this is the first Catholic conference when somebody got booed, but it was because the discussion was so lively. They didn't want it to end.
Well, great thing about, Peterson is he thinks on the fly. He's not just giving canned answers, and then it wasn't like just, 1, 2, 3, but he would engage the two of us. Like I would say something and I want to follow up on that. And so it made the conversation lively.
Well, again, hopefully we'll be able to release that video sometime pretty soon. All right, Bishop. Well, this episode is releasing just before Christmas, and with Christmas around the corner, I thought it was a good chance to take a fresh look at the story of the birth of Jesus, which of course all Christians will hear proclaimed on Christmas. Let's begin with this. You've said before that the infancy narratives are not cloying, sentimental kids' stories, but if you understand the literary genre, techniques, motivations, that in truth, the infancy narratives are a call to spiritual revolution. They're subversive. Yeah. Why do you believe that?
I go back to Hans Urs von Balthasar, who said, like, one of the marks of great architecture is that every part of the building, in a way, speaks of the whole building. Or like a great sculpture, every part of it is so integrated that it speaks in a way of the whole, right? There's something of that quality, he argued, I think correctly, about the Gospels. that every part of the gospel, every little bit, every story in it, every image in it, in a way speaks of the entire gospel. What's the gospel but the good news of an imperial victory? That God in Christ has won a victory over the powers of the world. That's the good news. Well, once you get that, you can see, every single part of the gospel story speaks of the totality. And the Christmas story is a very good example of that principle, that it's not some little isolated saccharine, introduction, but it speaks of the cross, of the resurrection, of the great battle between the power of God and the powers of the world.
I thought what we could do is maybe walk through line by line the Christmas narrative as presented in the Gospel of Luke. So that'll be Luke chapter 2. This is the version that's read on morning mass on Christmas Day. I think each Christmas liturgy uses a different gospel, but morning mass is from the Gospel of Luke. So Luke's account begins like this. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So all went to be enrolled, each to his own town. What do we make of this opening passage?
There's several things actually packed in there, and a first century audience wouldn't have missed it. It begins the way most great stories and epic poems would have begun in the ancient world, by invoking these high and mighty figures. That's what poets and writers bothered to write about, were these great figures. So Quirinius, the Roman governor of Syria, and then Caesar Augustus, who's the king of the whole world. What's interesting is Luke is preparing his reader, though, for a surprise, because though he begins with those figures, they're not the main characters. They're kind of ancillary characters, and it's really about this little nobody couple making their way to a little dusty outpost of the empire of Caesar. So it sets up a surprise, but it also does something else, Brandon. It keeps those two figures in the back of our minds. So as we read the story of Christmas, we're meant to have Quirinius and especially Caesar Augustus in mind, because they're going to be the foil to the real story that he's telling. The other thing I think we should notice about it is the census, and that might strike us as kind of an innocent thing to do, but not in a biblical framework at all. Remember, in the Old Testament, David gets into a lot of trouble with God when he calls for a census. And you say, why? Well, it was seen as a very paradigmatically powerful and manipulative thing to do. If a king counts his countrymen carefully, then he can tax them more efficiently. He can draft them into the army more effectively. It was a very aggressive sort of move. So as the story of Christmas opens, you have the most powerful figure in the world doing this paradigmatically sort of tyrannical thing. You're meant to see, there he is, the king of the world doing a typically kingly thing. Now, what's going to be fun to watch is how Luke says, that's not the king I'm really interested in. And he paints the picture then.
So he does that almost immediately in the next verse, because he says Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem, and while they were there, the time came for her to have her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, there's a lot there. I want to focus on each of those phrases independently, but let's start with the fact that there was no room for them in the inn. Why is that detail significant?
Yeah, well, think of this. We're meant to hear the contrast between Rome, because he's mentioned Caesar Augustus, who's the emperor of Rome, and then Bethlehem. What's Bethlehem? Well, that's this little nothing town, but it was the town of King David. So you're seeing this contrast between the king of the world, the Roman king, and a new David who's arriving, right? So we're meant to see that. But then think about this. Who had the greatest house in the ancient world? Well, it would have been Caesar. If you go to this day to Rome and you go in the Roman Forum and let's say you're facing the Colosseum, look up to your right and you'll see this elevation. That's called the Palatine Hill. And the palace of the emperor was up there, and it came from that word palatina. That's our words palazzo and palace and palais come from that. So here's the best housed person in the ancient world. And by contrast, here's this other king, the new David, who has no place to stay. In fact, even the lousy, probably literally lousy, travelers hostel in little Bethlehem, even that wasn't good enough for him. So it's the contrast between what's your vision of the good life? Is it about being well housed and well protected and living on the Palatine Hill? Or is it about something else? That's what I think Luke is suggesting.
So again, Luke tells us that after being born, Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes. I know this detail was beloved by the church fathers who commented on it often, but what does this signal?
A number of things, but I think of who is the freest, rangiest person in the ancient world would have been the Roman emperor. Could do whatever he wanted. He had almost limitless power. By that time, so the restrictions of the Roman Republic were gone, and we have this imperial Rome has emerged. So the emperor was uncontested, really, in his power. He could do whatever he wanted. Then you've got this little baby, tiny, tiny baby, who has almost no power, and more to it, is wrapped up in these swaddling bands, which means he has almost zero freedom of movement. Well, we got two kings, don't we? One vision of kingship, boy, he's well protected in his palace, and he's able to do whatever he wants. But then the true king, no place to lay his head, and wrapped up. And what do we begin to see in the course of the gospel? It's when we bind ourselves to the other in love, when we wrap up our own egotism and we give ourselves to the other in love, that we find real life and real joy. So it's, again, a contrast, I think, is being emphasized here.
So Luke tells us this newborn baby, Jesus, is wrapped in swaddling clothes, but then he's placed in a manger. He's laid in a manger, Luke says. What should we take away from that?
I think a lot. We've seen so many Christmas cards that it seems kind of like charmingly bucolic and, in the manger and the animals around. But see, what's a manger? Manger in French means to eat, right? Mangeoire is a place, not where human beings eat in a civilized way. It's where animals eat. It's a feeding trough for animals. Imagine how filthy it was, how gross it was. And the fact that this new Davidic king, who's forced to be born in, a cave, we say, or something, or stable, is now placed in this filthy spot, But press it another direction. Who's the best fed person in the ancient world? It had to be Caesar, Augustus in Rome. He'd get whatever he wanted. Any sensual pleasure he wanted, he could get. The best fed man in the world. The fact that the new king is not so much fed, but becomes food for the world. So the manger for the animals is evocative of the one who will say when he comes of age, "This is my body given for you. This is my blood poured out for you." He will become food for the other. Luke keeps asking us, which one of these is the true king? See?
Luke next shifts his focus away from the manger and out to the fields, which is an interesting move. He says that now there were shepherds in that region living in the fields and keeping the night watch over the flock. The angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were struck with great fear. Why is it significant that shepherds were the first recipients of this good news outside of the Holy Family?
Because they were such lowlifes in the minds of people of that time. Again, we get sort of romantic about shepherds because we've seen so many Christmas cards and Christmas paintings, and there's something romantic about, the shepherds in the field. But in Jesus' time and place, shepherd was like a one step above a sort of homeless person. It was kind of a drifter, someone that couldn't get a better job, someone whose opinion would never been respected. Someone like Caesar Augustus would be as far as possible from a shepherd. He had nothing to do with shepherds. He'd have courtiers around him, high-level figures. The great irony is that the angel of the Lord, the representative of God, the heavenly power, speaks not to any of the courtiers of Caesar Augustus, but speaks to these nobodies, less than nobodies, these kind of despised, marginalized people. That's again the turning upside down that's consistent in this story.
Many have noted how the first recipients of the good news of the baby Christ being born are the shepherds, the nobodies. But then when Christ is raised from the dead, the first to receive that news are the nobody peasant women, the last people you would expect to receive that. Is there a connection there that this is the way God reveals himself?
Yeah, and there's all kinds of links there, as you suggest in the Church Fathers, where the wood of the manger, well, that's like the wood of the cross. The swaddling bands of the baby Jesus are like the shroud that wraps up his dead body. So there you see a lot of parallels between the nativity account and the crucifixion account.
Well, we then discover that the angel who appears to these shepherds says to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. For today in the city of David, a Savior has been born for you, who is Messiah and Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find an infant wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." The first words that the angel speaks to these shepherds are, "Do not be afraid." Why is that notable?
That's always what the angels say. And we've again seen too many Renaissance paintings of angels as little, bare-bottomed babies and little, cutesy pie figures. That's not an angel at all in the Bible. An angel's fearsome. And that's why their first word is typically, don't be afraid, which means people were afraid of them. And imagine this entity that emerges out of another dimensional system at a much higher pitch of ontological perfection, suddenly breaks into your world. What would your reaction be? I think fear is perfectly understandable. So that's the first thing, is we shouldn't get sentimental about angels. They're fearsome characters. And look what he announces. And this is now for the Jewish audience who's not going to miss any bit of this. This Messiah and Lord, Mashiach is the Hebrew there. Rendered in the Greek, of course, is Christos, Christ, we say in English, the anointed one. Well, see, any Jew hearing Mashiach would have thought David right away. And we heard already, it's in David's city this is taking place, Bethlehem. The angel of the Annunciation, of course, it said that this one will be on the throne of his father David. So all these Davidic overtones. And David is indeed the great king of Israel. And the expectation was he would take on the enemies of Israel. He'd take on Rome, he'd defeat them. And Luke is saying, yes, he will. But how powerful and interesting that he says, and here he is, Messiah, Lord, the new David, the king. And the sign will be a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger? What? That's the sign? See, and that's the upending that is implicit in the entire gospel. Because he's going to win this fight not with the weapons of the world. He's going to win this fight precisely by dying on the cross and rising from the dead. And it's an opening up of a whole new world. But it's signaled right from the beginning by the angels.
So again, we hear just from one angel who makes this announcement to the shepherds, but then we discover in Luke's gospel that suddenly there was a multitude of the heavenly host with the angel praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." You've noted before that the Greek word used for host, the host of angels, usually refers to an army. What's Luke getting at here with that word choice? And
yeah, the English rendered there as host gives you that sense. You talk about, the king coming with his hosts to take on his enemy. But that's the word, is appearing with the single fearsome angel is now an entire army of angels. So an overwhelmingly powerful, that doesn't even begin to get it, extraordinary, frightening, unnerving display of the heavenly power. Well, how come Caesar Augustus was able to dominate the world? Because he had an army that was in the eyes of the world just like that. It was overwhelming. It was the best equipped, it was the best trained and all that. That's why he was able to dominate the world. Luke is saying, I know this baby looks like nothing, this baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, but the baby has got an army of angels with him. And that's far more powerful than anything that's in the world. I'll tell you, just to bring this back home, as we record these words, I'm just, a couple weeks removed from the synod. I was in Rome, and it just struck me over and over again. Everyone's thinking about the Roman Empire today, right? That's the thing that men think about, the Roman Empire. Well, I thought about it a lot when I was there, because you can't miss it. Everywhere you go, there are signs of the Roman Empire. But what are they? They're ruins. It's a wreck. It's a wreck. There's dusty ruins remain. But there I was, as a bishop of the Catholic Church, founded by that baby, right? Founded by that baby who was put to death on a miserable cross by Caesar's representative. And yet Caesar and his empire, they are long gone. But the baby with the angel army won. And that church weirdly endures to this day. Now, full of sinful people like me, I get it, and that's true. But weirdly, the church of the baby king remains, and Caesar is long gone, which tells me, see, that Luke was right. Even though when he was writing that story, it wasn't clear at all. Let's say Luke's writing that, I don't know, around the year 80 or so, 85 maybe. Not clear at all. Rome was the height of its power in that time. The church was this struggling reality in little corners of the Roman Empire. But by God, he was right. The baby king did have an army of angels behind him and perdures to this day, even as the empires come and go and break against the rock of the church remains. That to me is very much at the heart of this story.
It reminds me of a story I know you've shared before. I think actually it was in the Catholicism series of your great hero and mentor, Cardinal George, who was thinking of the Roman Empire. How many days do you think of the times a day you think of the Roman Empire? But it was, I think, at the election of Pope Benedict XVI. Yeah. You want to share that story?
Yeah. The cameras caught his face. Cardinal George came out with the other cardinals, having just elected Benedict, and the Pope is waving, and then the other cardinals, or the cardinals that remained, came out on the balcony, and they're all kind of smiling and shaking hands and so on. But the Cardinal George had this very pensive expression on his face, and the cameras caught it. So when he got home, people were curious, and they said, what were you thinking about as you stood there with that very pensive look on your face? And he said really what I've just said. He said, well, I was thinking about the Palatine Hill and the Roman emperor and how, where's his successor? And finally, who cares? But the successor of Peter, he's right there. He's right next to me. And same idea, isn't it? Say what you want about the church. And again, sinners like me are in it. And, we individual sinners can make a mess of things. But the church remains. It's a profound mystery, the more you think about it. It's a confounding mystery. What other institution even has endured? None. The church is mysteriously there, and that's what's announced in the Christmas story.
Let's close with this question. What should we make of the fact that God chose to become incarnate in the form of a baby? Presumably, he could have come in any shape, any form. He could have been a strong man, a warrior, a king. He could have just appeared as a king.
Right.
Why a baby?
I like our shared hero, C.S. Lewis's line. He had to sneak clandestinely behind enemy lines. So when the Lord came, he didn't come bursting through the door of the enemy. He was slipped like a spy, like a secret agent, quietly behind enemy lines, so he wasn't noticed at first. It's a way too, Brandon, of thinking about the famous problem of the silent years of Jesus. That is also very mysterious the more you think about it. Here's the Son of God comes, but for 30 years, roughly, let's say, or 28 years, whatever it is, he just lived in this little nothing town, Nazareth, with his mother and his friends, I guess, and a carpenter. What gives? Why didn't he just kind of just burst into action? Well, biding his time like a good and patient spy, so he wouldn't be noticed as he came of age. And only when his hour indeed had come, right, was he ready to manifest himself. I think that's still a powerful explanation of it.
Well, it's time now for our question from one of our listeners. If you'd like to submit a question to Bishop Barron, you can do so at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today we have one from Emily in Australia. She's asking about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Here's Emily.
Hi, Bishop. I'm Emily from Sydney, Australia, and I had a question about the Eucharist. I was recently asked when defending the true presence, well, whose body is it? Infant, crucified, or resurrected Jesus? I didn't feel I had a sufficient answer. Can you help me?
Yeah, a good question. I think the best way and the simplest way to say it's the resurrected and glorified Christ who's really present. Now, to say that, it's to say the Christ who is outside of space and time, inclusive of it. So, you could say the totality of Christ's earthly life is also, really present in the glorified body of the Lord. So I think you could say it's both and in a way. It's an all-inclusive presence. But the best shorthand would be to say that it's the glorified and risen Christ who's really present.
Well, thanks, Emily, for that question. Listen, as we near the new year, maybe you want a resolution to move yourself into a higher plane, theologically, spiritually speaking. I encourage you to check out the Word on Fire Institute. Now's a great time to join. We've revamped the Institute in several ways. One is we have a brand new platform, a mobile app. We have over 40 courses in theology, philosophy, evangelization. When you sign up, you'll get free books. You'll get a free copy, a free subscription of the Evangelization and Culture Journal. You'll get access to all of Bishop Barron's films and study programs. There's a lot going on inside the Institute. We also have seminars, book clubs, writing groups, a whole lot more. So check it out. Maybe make that your New Year's resolution. Sign up today at the website wordonfire.org/institute. Again, the website's wordonfire.org/institute. Well, thanks so much for watching and listening. We wish you a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.